This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com. The
unorganized and definitely unscripted. And boy, are we going to find a place unscripted tonight. Welcome to this month's journey through the Looking Glass. I am your co-host, Scott Criscuolo. Hope everyone is enjoying their April, whether you celebrate Easter or Passover, any of the other holidays at this time of year. We got a great show for you this month because this is a very, very deep topic. So one that this rabbit hole might take us all the way down the bottom and back up again. But an interesting one. One I think that we've been wanting to talk about for a long time. But let me bring in my compadre. He is the Thunder from Down Under. And I want to say that I think for the first time in the history of our show, I think that the temperatures are close together. Usually they're not. Usually we're about 60 degrees apart. I don't think we are this time. Good evening, David Hall. How are you?
I'm doing well, Scott. It's good to talk to you again. It's good to talk to all our listeners. Glad you can join us. Yes, it is definitely starting to cool down here in Australia, down here in my neck of the woods of just not far out from Sydney. It's 21 Celsius, which is about 69, 70 your end. But definitely starting to cool down. Definitely cooling down in the mornings. With really feeling it overnight. Not that it gets anywhere near as cold as it does for you.
Well, it's funny you say that because we have had a weird heat spurt here in the Northeast and northeastern part of the United States over the past 2 weeks. The official temperature today was like 61. So I would say that you and I are about as close temperature-wise as we've ever been. We're only about 8 degrees apart. Usually we're about 58 degrees apart, depending on the time of the year. But
right.
But it's always a pleasure, Dave. Great to be with you again, as always. Check out our archive. For those that are new to the show, welcome. It's an honor to have you. Our show, just to recap, we won't go through all the topics, but our show is not episodic. So you could start listening. If you're listening to our show for the first time, welcome. It's an honor to have you here on the PTB Wrestling Network, placetobe.podbean.com. Please follow us on Twitter at PTBNWrestling. But this is not episodic, so you could keep listening to this episode. It won't affect the fact if you haven't listened to the previous. But after this, jump on our archive and go back to all of our previous episodes of Through the Looking Glass. We've had some pretty interesting and unique journeys all over the place, all over history in terms of time, place, guy, gal, anything. And tonight is a deep dive in the pool. When Dave proposed this topic for this month, I went, "Oh my! This is going to be a deep one because you could go through so many avenues, and there's a ton of changes that would have to be made from here compared to reality, because doing what we're doing tonight in an alternate universe through the Looking Glass will definitely affect a ton of other things. And we'll get into that. As we move ahead tonight. So, Dave, the floor is yours. Get us ready. Where are we jumping tonight through the Looking Glass?
Well, the time machines are set and ready to go. Did you know, Scott, that it is 22 years since World Championship Wrestling closed its doors after being purchased by WWE, shut down, stopped producing any form of events, pay-per-views, and all that. 22 years. Can you believe that? It's been more time that they've been dead than they were ever alive.
That's great. I agree with you. I'll tell you why that's nuts, Dave, is because when we did our GWCW matches project a few years ago, we realized that it was very easy to do that because we only pretty much used a swath of 20 years from 1981 to 2001, because before 1981, the Mid-Atlantic region was very regional. I mean, you couldn't watch it elsewhere in the world. fast forward to like 1985, and it was, I could get Superstation or, here in Connecticut where I grew up and a lot of other places. And then 2001, they were gone. When we tried to do the GWWE one for best matches, oh my God, because you can never end. You go all the way back to the 70s and you're all the way up to, yesterday if you really wanted to. But this is interesting. The fact that you just said that 22 years since WCW shut the door, or I should say that since the door was shut on them.
That's about right.
Is mind-boggling. I got to be honest. It really is,
It is. And I remember the time. I remember it vividly. I was, deep into everything that was happening at the time. I remember when the first glimpses of a potential sale started to come across the internet, even back as sort of December 2000, that sort of cropped its head. And, as we all know, history shows that the WCW was bought out by Vince McMahon and the WWE. Tape libraries all there, and we've been able to enjoy the benefits of that for many years. But
yes,
but Vince wasn't the original purchaser. In fact, Vince sort of managed to get it as on a bargain basement when a different sale didn't go through. Fusion Media, sort of spearheaded by Eric Bischoff. They were hoping to buy it. They'd done sort of due diligence, and all the paperwork had been done, and then that fell apart when, as the history goes, I think it was Brad Siegel and at the turn what had become the merger of Time Warner, they hand the television product the opportunity to showcase on television, and so that sale basically bit the bullet, and as such WCW merges or is bought out by WWE, and we know the story from there. But it got me wondering, it's got me thinking over the years. I think many wrestling fans have asked the question, what if WCW had survived in some manner, had not been brought out by Vince? Now, whether it was purchased by Fusion, whether it was purchased by another buyer, that's irrelevant to our stories today. But the question that we're going to look at today is, what might have happened? What might the world of WCW have looked like if it had been allowed to continue? If WCW had been purchased by someone other than Vince McMahon, and the entity of World Championship Wrestling continued to produce wrestling events throughout 2001 and into the future, and would it have survived? Would it have made it? I guess that's the question we're going to look at today. That's some of the thoughts we're going to tackle. It's as you said, Scott. This could go anywhere and everywhere, and we probably could do this. We could probably do this as a series. You could do a month by month series on this, and probably not really scratch the surface. But we're gonna give it a good go today. In one episode, we're gonna see how we go. So WCW, Scott, were you watching 2000, 2001? I mean, we've all admitted, we all know that all of us were sort of watching the Attitude Era and Austin and Rock, and we're all heavy into that. But where was WCW on your radar at the back end of its life?
Not really. Well, I mean, I did watch. I was really turned off. I think the moment that I kind of tuned out to WCW was right after Starrcade '98. That ridiculous as the storyline was, and I don't know what sense it made, but Kevin Nash, and we talked about this on our Goldberg episode, Dave. I part of me never still understood Goldberg losing to Kevin Nash. I just thought that was kind of stupid, and never a fan of it. And I feel like WCW was not the same after that. Now, they did survive into 99, but it was by the time they hit 2000, they were on life support. WWF was kicking their butts every week. The product was better. You had an awesome heel champion in Triple H. You had The Rock at the top of the card. Even with Steve Austin out in 2000, you had just absolute studs in the mid card, the Kurt Angles, Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho, the tag division, Edge and Christian, the Dudleys, the Hardys. The company was on fire. And the worst thing for WCW was that WWF was doing that well. And you were stuck with the Tank Abbotts and the huge erection and, G.I. Bro and David Flair and just absolute crap. And then the Bash the Beach thing with Hogan and Kidman, and Russo said, "You'll never see this piece of shit here again," and just all this nonsense. And pretty much by July or August, it was already kind of starting that WCW was cooked. I remember the fall. I just read a great book called Nitro, which I highly recommend everybody read. It's about the history of WCW and the rise and fall of Nitro. And those discussions were starting, I would say in late fall, early winter. And I had no thinking that WWF was ever going to buy them. But to stay focused with your question, I was watching WCW until Starrcade 98. And then the finger poke, probably the kicker was that January 4th, 99 episode of Nitro with the finger poke and Tony pretty much being bullied into saying that Mick Foley winning the world title would put butts in the seats. And then we all changed the channel. And that moment in Worcester when, when the glass broke and it was the biggest pop in the history of the business and Mick won the title, that doomed WCW. So to answer your question, I probably fell off the map after Starrcade 98 and into the beginning of 99.
Yeah, it's interesting because down here in Australia, prior to 98, there really was no broadcast of WCW. We relied on the Aftermags. We had to rely on videotapes to watch what was happening in that company, and it might have been during sometime in 97, but in 98 the rise of cable television down here in Australia allowed they actually had the TNT network on one of the cable channels down here, cable companies down here, and that allowed Nitro and all the WCW pay-per-views to start to be aired in Australia. So it's interesting that while it's in demise in the US and probably elsewhere in the world, WCW was actually on a bit of a surge down here in Australia. It was getting television coverage. It was getting good ratings from an Australian cable perspective. And there were a lot of I just started working as a teacher just out of uni in that time period, sort of 98, 99, and there were a lot of young people who were watching WCW and would walk around saying WCW was better than WWF, which I never agreed with them, but it was there, it was out there, and so we were only just getting the being able to watch pay-per-view these events live, and watching Nitro for the first time was a unique experience for those who watched it. Now, I didn't really, because I'd already determined that WWF was better. But having said that, 2000, you talk about, sort of Bash at the Beach and everything that happened with Hogan, and that sort of really being the start of the massive decline, although it happened from the finger poke and the end of the Goldberg streak. But
right.
Sort of August, September 2000, WCW toured Australia, and it was my first live wrestling event.
Yep.
And it was massive. They sold out those shows in 15, 20 minutes. They did shows in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, 2 shows in Sydney, 2 shows in Melbourne, 1 in Brisbane. I think there was 1 elsewhere. And they all sold. I tried to get, so the interesting thing was they did a Thunder taping in Sydney, and I tried to get tickets to that. That sold out in 10, 15 minutes. And then they announced essentially a house show, and I managed to get tickets to that event. And I'm glad I did, because the house show was so much better than the television product. So, but yeah, sold out, massive tour down here in Australia. Infamous for Juventud Guerrero losing his mind on drugs and in a hotel down here and being kicked out of the country. But yeah, it was a big resurgence in Australia. But I don't think you can't run a company on one tour. WCW certainly learnt that, and yeah, it was building here, but it was never something I was much like you. I was probably about 12 months later. Everything that happened around Bret, I think Bret's the whole Bret Hart Goldberg storyline. I sort of really got caught back up in Bret Hart's quest for the WCW title, and I watched that Starrcade '99, and I thought, oh, here we go. And then I didn't like the end, and then Bret had his concussion, and just everything went to pieces. I felt January 2000. And I stopped. That was it. I was done. WWF only after that point was really where my focus was.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was. It's just interesting comparing the worlds. Oceans apart gives different dynamic of how the company was going. But I certainly remember, as I said, I remember when the sale happened. It caught me. I must admit the Fusion sale stuff was all over the internet for a couple of months. It was the builds and it's going to happen. And then it fell through, and then it just came out of nowhere that Vince had bought it. It literally felt like it came out of nowhere. One day I went online and it was Vince has bought it, and by the end of the weekend they were announcing it on Raw and Nitro.
I remember the same thing. Like the Fusion thing was going crazy. Pretty much after January, like probably mid to late January, it was really getting hot and heavy. Then sometime in, I guess, early March is when I think the Fusion fell apart. Maybe it was late February. And one random day, that Friday before, so that would be what, March 23rd. Because it was the Friday before that famous Nitro in Panama Beach and the Raw in Cleveland. So March 23rd, 2001, I was at my girlfriend's house in her basement, and I was going on the internet. She was, I think, feeding her cat or something, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go, check my email. And email 2001, how rudimentary. And my Hotmail, I was checking my Hotmail.
And dial up.
Yeah, and I went on WWF.com because I heard there was a sale on WrestleMania merch. So I said, "Oh, cool! I feel like getting a WrestleMania shirt." I wasn't going to Houston, of course, but I wanted to get. I love the poster with Rock and Steve's faces above the Astrodome. I always thought that was a cool poster. And then right on the front page, WWF has bought WCW, and there was the WCW logo. I crapped myself. I literally I did not know how or what to think. I'm like, oh my God, the war is over. Now, take into account, Dave, that ECW was done at this point for probably about a month and a half, because I don't think
they had a show in January, and they had a show and then they had their last show in March.
Yep. So they
didn't really have anything in between, but they just closed their doors as well.
Yeah. And Paul Heyman pretty much showed up that week because he obviously was Paul debuted sometime in the beginning of March because
Jerry had gone walkabouts because they'd fired the cat.
Yes, the cat got fired, and Jerry was defending his wife. So Jerry quit. So Jerry's last show was No Way Out 2001, which incidentally is one of the greatest secondary shows of all time. And I don't care what universe or looking glass you're looking through, that show was amazing. So ECW we had already but you see, ECW we knew was in the toilet. That was not uncommon knowledge. But we, as wrestling fans, pretty much thought somebody was going to buy WCW and keep it going. But then when that Friday afternoon in my girlfriend's basement in the lush town of Orange, Connecticut, I saw that front page and it said WWF scratch logo has purchased WCW. I was stunned. Why wouldn't you have been? It just, I don't know what's going to happen. That weekend was just, we were breathless with anticipation. They did the last Thunder that previous Thursday. And then we get to Monday in Cleveland for Raw, and Nitro is in Panama City, and that was just, it was surreal. And it was a weird time too, Dave, because we were only 1 week away from WrestleMania, which, as we know, WrestleMania 17, one of the best of all time. And we had no issue. I mean, we didn't know it. WCW, we don't have time for this. We got Rock and Austin. We got Triple H and Taker, Shane versus Vince. We got a ton of shit going on. We don't have time for this. How do we have time to wrap our heads around the fact that WWF now won the war, and we had the Appomattox Courthouse at the end of the Civil War, and the American Revolution, I guess. I don't know. I had no idea how to react to, how to react to this. No idea. I honestly had no idea.
Yeah, and it was one of those things I don't think anyone really knew where it was going to go, what was going to happen. This episode is not about, we're not doing anything about the invasion, but the original talk was that everyone believed it was, and the talk coming out of WWF was they were going to run it as a separate company. They were going to keep it as its own entity, and unfortunately, due to various circumstances and events and Vince McMahon's opinions, and clearly at the time that they were the only ones that mattered, WCW didn't continue in that vein, and we all know the invasion happened, but it really was at the time. What's going to happen here? What is going to happen? And I mean, you've heard interviews with the WCW guys who were at that last Nitro. They were very much, we don't know what the future holds. We had no idea. Even the guys whose contracts got picked up, they've talked about the fact that they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know whether they would still have a job, or how that would look if they did have a job. So it wasn't just us as fans that were in the dark. It was the guys who were on the WCW roster. They had no idea as well. So yeah, a very surreal time.
I mean, what was going to happen was was it going to be a separate entity? Was Vince going to, Vince was going to run it as a separate entity, and were they going to be another night? Would they replace SmackDown? I had no idea. I really had no idea. It was, what a time in wrestling, Dave. I mean, we had for a good 8 years, from 1993 to 2001, we had 8 years of three companies: WWF, WCW, and ECW.
Yeah.
And probably from 96 to 98, those 3 years, all three companies were thriving at the same time. That was,
absolutely.
I mean, it was crazy. And then by 99, obviously WCW and ECW, that was all about money. Well, ECW was about money. WCW was about politics involving the networks and Turner and all that kind of stuff. But WWF was just the better. By the time we hit 2001, obviously WWF was just the better project.
Better product.
Better promotion. And I shuddered to think how wrestling was going to be from this point forward. Now, obviously, we get to 2002, and two promotions are created. We had TNA, which, in my opinion, was the new WCW, and then Ring of Honor, which seemed like the current, like a new ECW, except not as extreme, but same thing. We'll get to that in a minute, because there's a lot of things to talk about in an alternate universe pertaining to those two promotions. But I was totally dumbfounded as to what the future was going to hold in professional wrestling, because we were just used to 3 promotions for those years on different nights. And if you were lucky in ECW and you could stay up till 3:00 in the morning on a Saturday night, if you're drunk or not, which during my college years I was. So that's how I watched ECW. You had 3 promotions. You had WWF, you had WCW, and you had the wild card promotion, ECW. And then, I mean, if you had the money and you were tape trading, you had New Japan stuff and All Japan stuff. But we're talking about here in North America, it's pretty much those 3. So by 2001, that March night, when it went from 3 to 1, I didn't know what the future would hold, Dave, for pro wrestling at this point. I don't think anybody did, you know?
No, I don't think I agree with you. I don't think anyone had any idea, and you know, we've seen how it all developed over time. But today we're gonna take a look at maybe what could have happened. What could have happened if WCW didn't get bought by WWE? As I said, what could have been done? And to go on this journey, Scott Criscuolo and David Hall are going to take on the role of essentially head of talent relations and head of booking, and we're just going to give you some possible thoughts, some ideas of how the direction may have gone, and perhaps if this had, you know, whether or not this might have allowed a company to thrive again. I don't know. And we're going to do it probably more. We're not going to do a month by month, because we're not looking at every week's TV. That's not what we're going to do. We're just going to give a bit of a broad overview, some broad strokes. We're going to take a couple of things as an assumption. It doesn't matter who's bought WCW. It just hasn't been bought by Vince. That's assumption number 1. Assumption number 2, to keep an entity going, they would have needed TV. How, where, why is irrelevant, but there would have at least been the opportunity to put on a product on a weekly basis.
Right.
We're going to assume WCW Nitro continues somewhere. Might not have been on TNT, might not have been on Turner in any way, but it's out there somewhere. The new owners would have got TV time somehow. That we're going to assume that number 2, and obviously number 3, that there is ongoing pay-per-view products. So that's where we're going to take those assumptions as given. We're not going to do weekly Nitro results. That's not what we're about. But that's our given. So the starting point needs to be, when you look at, if you're going to rebuild WCW, the company's been bought. We're looking at this company as, who are we going to focus on? Who are we going to focus around? And I guess I want to start by asking, WCW was known to have a deep roster. Clearly by 2001, it had been significantly diminished in numbers, but there were still some key players out there. There was still a lot of young talent, and there's a lot of guys that went on to have big, successful careers in WWE. So we have the benefit of hindsight. We have the benefit to be able to look back and go, we know where some guys did go, and we have the ability to maybe make use of them. We also know there are guys that might have been missed opportunities. So I'm going to ask you this question to start with, Scott. Which WCW wrestlers would you prioritize to be signing? We know that guys had contracts with Time Warner and they may have had to have been bought out. We're going to assume that these guys were looking to continue working. So not going to sit on their massive contracts, that there's going to be a way for these contracts to be carried over, picked up, whatever. Who would you be looking at picking up from WCW to make use of?
Well, if you look at it, the three main players in WCW at the top, at least in my opinion, based on that moment, were Scott Steiner, Jeff Jarrett, and Booker T. They were the three main guys at the top. You had your Lugers, you had your Stings, you had, I think Nash was kind of still around. Hogan was gone. In 2001, he was doing that promotion with XWF or whatever with Jimmy Hart, so he was gone. I'd like to think, obviously, Goldberg was probably still around. So yeah. I would definitely, Goldberg is the number one, I think. I think that the two big ones for me are Goldberg and Sting. I think you need to keep them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You got to keep Goldberg and Sting. I would keep Booker T. Booker T was crazy over. He had already won the WCW title a couple times at that point. I would have kept Jeff Jarrett, believe it or not, because I think he was a good scumbag, asshole heel, so I think he'd have been good. Scott Steiner is the wild card in this, Dave, because Scott Steiner was a good heel, good WCW champion, but an absolute nut job. And I think a new management team running WCW, I don't think would have dealt with his crap.
Mm.
Now, was he bankable enough for that to be swept under the rug? I'm going to say no. I think he would have. I think eventually Scott Steiner would have probably had his contract played out, and I have a feeling at some point he would have gone to the WWF.
Yeah,
I do. So, in terms of the bankable guys, and I'm curious your thoughts, Dave, because you might agree with some of mine. I'd like to hear some more that you have that I'm not thinking of. I would have definitely kept Goldberg. He was obviously the face of the company, and he would have been the fans still loved him, and I think he's a guy that would have kept the crowds coming in. But you needed to rebook him to the moon, and he's a baby face. He's not a heel.
Yeah.
Sting. Well, it's Sting, Dave. I mean, it's WCW's Undertaker. How do you not keep him? You let Sting go, you might as well shut the doors.
Yeah.
My opinion. Booker T, up and coming, great singles wrestler. He had feuded with Benoit. He was a great TV champion. I think at least once he won the U.S. title.
Oh, yeah,
and he had feuded, a couple times. And he had feuded with Jarrett and was a pretty good WCW champion. So overall, those are probably the five guys. I will say Goldberg, Sting, Jarrett, and Booker. After that, DDP. DDP, I think I would keep, obviously, as well. DDP. After that, well, at least we're talking about the main events now. We'll get to other stuff, cruisers and tag teams in a little bit. But at the top, in terms of the bankable guys that are going to bring you to the building, those are the five guys I think I would start off with trying to lock down for at least a couple of years.
Yeah, I think I would absolutely agree with you. The number one priority would need to be Goldberg. You want Goldberg on your roster. He was the most marketable player. When I shared this before when we did our Goldberg episode, when I attended that event down here in Australia and Goldberg came out, it was the loudest reaction I had ever heard in my life. And to this day since. And I've been to other wrestling events since, and nothing compared to the reaction Goldberg got when he came out at a time when he was being booked terribly. So he was your player. And I think we've seen over time, when used correctly and when booked correctly, he can be phenomenal. He can do what you need him to do. He's not a ring technician. He's not there to put on 20, 30-minute, wrestling classics, but he is going to bring the fans in. He's someone that is believable and they can get behind. So he's your number one. I agree with Booker. Absolutely has to be there. And I agree, Jarrett he's a guy I think who becomes your versatile workhorse who sort of holds the card together a little bit. He might not, I'm not sure I'd ever take the route that, make him the number one guy like he was in TNA, but I think he's a guy who can be at the top of the card and keep a lot of things together and hold storylines together. He can work with just about anyone, and he's a guy that would bring some stability and some leadership to, I think, you look at him as a leader, locker room leader, I think, to help you out. So I agree with keeping those ones. I would definitely 100% Sting. You got to use the line. He is the Undertaker for WC. He's their version of the Undertaker, and in fact, that's how I think he needs to be. He would need to be presented. He should be getting presented as that legend, that living legend, that active legend. Like Undertaker, he had his wins, he had his losses. He didn't need to be champion. Sting doesn't need to be champion, but Sting's the guy that everyone's going to run into him at some point. He's the conscience of WCW, I guess, is the way, the term that gets used.
I agree with you 100%. Put it.
And he could have done so much with him. And look, I also agree with you about the perceptions of Scott Steiner. I think you need to sign him initially. And when we talk shortly about what we've been looking at in the main event scene, I think where things had gone, he needs to be there when you are restarting this company, when you're continuing this company on television and pay-per-view. He needs to be there at the beginning. But if his antics, he's someone that I wouldn't be surprised if you ended up releasing him down the track, because you're just not going to put up with his BS anymore. He acts up, you're gonna toss him to the curb. So I wouldn't want to make him. I wouldn't want to make him the foundation of the company. I probably wouldn't want to have the belt on him. But there are things that could be done with him early on. And if he behaves, hey, you can, he may be able to become more valuable down the track. But I think he was a hothead at this time. He was unpredictable, and you really weren't going to know what you're going to get. The other guy I'd look to sign up, not necessarily to be an in-ring talent a lot of the time, but I think Ric Flair had a lot to offer, and we've seen in WWE he had a lot to offer as a character, as a performer. He's a guy that you could have put in a few different roles, whether it be an authority figure, a manager, someone bringing up guys, the grizzled veteran who has those occasional matches. I think Ric Flair brings that legacy element that allows you to tie all the way back to the beginning. I think that's another guy I would probably look at wanting on the roster to do something. Most likely, probably more of an authority figure, or almost the way he came into WWE, that authority figure who's the people's boss. I think it would work well for a while, and then you could look at him doing similar what he did with Hunter, finding a guy who he's going to build as the future main heel. Whether I think you could do a very similar role that he did there in WCW, but I think he brings legitimacy to the legacy of the company, and I would want to have him as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel I'm sad. I didn't think of Ric Flair, but here's the thing about Slick Rick. In our universe, Dave, is he having the same kind of moderate mental problems that he has in our Prime universe? Because, as you know, when WCW closed, he was pissed off. He was not in shape. He was emotionally wrecked. So, in this alternate universe, is that still a thing? If the answer is yes,
I think the answer initially would be yes. You'd have to assume there are things he's got to overcome. But I think if you've got the right management structure in place and you are getting his input, I mean, a lot of it comes down to, like you said, how he was presented, how he was used. He really was, his legacy was tarnished so much by Bischoff and Russo and everything that happened with Nash and Hogan. And I think if you are talking to him about the role you want him to play and how he might have, he's shared in his book, a lot of his head issues are to do with how he would be in the ring. But if you're using him as a mouthpiece, as a authority type figure, as someone to help, talk for others, he could still do that, and he knew he could still do that. So you could bring him along and give him time to adjust, and then you get the right guys around him to build him up. A Jarrett, a Sting, who are going to be in his ear, guys who he trusts, going to be in his ear, going, "Hey, look, we can do one more match. You get yourself in shape. We can tear the house down." And I think you could rebuild him. It might take a little bit longer, but I think it would be possible.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Flair, at this point, you're curious about Flair wanting to go back to the WWF. You know how Flair is. Flair and Crockett were always a marriage, and WWF was the mistress, because every time he'd get treated like crap in WCW or NWA, whether it was 87 or 88 or 90 or whatever, there was always possibly a chance, that he could go to the WWF, but eventually he would go back to WCW or NWA, even if he knew he was being treated like garbage. And then finally, by 91, when Jim Herd really went over the edge, he's like, "All right, screw this. I'm going to see Vince for a couple years." So in 2001, the question would be, how much more does Flair have left? And here's an interesting one, Dave. Like you said, guys would help him out and he would put guys over and such, but would the booking brain trust, which I guess you have tasked on us, on you and I, which I approve, would he eventually go back to being the man? Would he eventually be world's heavyweight champion? Would we book him at the top? And I would be torn on that, because on the one hand, it's Slick Rick. But on the other hand, 2001 Slick Rick is not 1985 Slick Rick. So he's not even 1995 Slick Rick, maybe. Could he still go? Of course he could. He was going until 2008 when he retired. But is he a guy that would eventually be needed to become world champion again, or to be a valuable commodity? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that you'd ever be looking at him as a long-term player. I think those of you who've been listening to us for a while, we tossed around some ideas a few episodes ago about Ric Flair's retirement, and
right. Yep.
And one way to use him might have been one last victory, sort of a shock victory to win a world championship at the end. I could see you maybe doing something like that. A lot of when it's time for you have that shock moment where he pulls one out of the bag, but it never is a long-term thing. More from a nostalgic point of view is how I would look at it. I don't think he can be the man anymore. I don't think you want him. You don't want to build around him. You're wanting to build around the future. But you can use him to help build the future. I think is where the benefit of Slick Rick is. So that's there's some of our top guys. What about we're not going to go through the whole roster, but just some of the other guys on the roster. Are there guys there that you would be like, yeah, we need to keep them because we need to look for ways to use them. Undercard guys, lower level guys. Who would you be targeting as we've got to have them on the roster because there's something in them for the future?
Well, one thing I would definitely do is whenever this guy's contract is up, and I have no issues with him now, and I know he's an up and down guy, and either love him or you hate him, but one guy that the management would really have to take a hard look at as to whether they wanted him around is Lex Luger. I mean, 99 to 01 Lex was just unwatchable crap. I mean, it really was. And then you have what happened with, what happened with Elizabeth. Now, that doesn't happen until after WC. Now, here's an interesting thing. All right. Alternate universe, Dave. If this continues and Elizabeth, and the same thing happens in the Prime universe, and Elizabeth, passes away in 2003 and all the weird stuff that went on, is Luger a liability? I mean, coming from a guy who was not the biggest Luger fan in the end, I don't know. And if we're in charge of the booking, I don't think there's any room for Lex Luger, to be honest. Another guy that I would probably have gotten rid of, because even though he had a good looking build and everything, a guy that I probably would not have kept around was Buff Bagwell. I honestly don't think he took the business seriously, and I think he was kind of a hump. So what they did to him on that Raw in Tacoma or SmackDown in Tacoma, I would do too. I kind of dug Vampiro. That's a guy I would have kept around. Kind of dug his character. I like Vampiro. I would definitely go through the mid card in terms of those factions, like Misfits in Action, or Ray. Oh my God, I would totally keep Ray.
Yes,
got to keep Ray. Duh. Here's an interesting thing. Even though they all left in 2000, well, we're not talking about guys from other promotions, so we'll go.
Not yet. We'll get to them later.
Yeah, we'll get to there. I never mind. I was going to bring up somebody, and then I realized he technically wasn't there, so we'll hold off on that. Oh God.
I think I'll jump in here. I think you've said Ray. I think guys like Ray, Billy Kidman.
Kidman. Yep.
Helms. I think what Helms did in WWE and the use of the Hurricane character, I would have loved to have seen that. Given I think Helms demonstrated he could do a lot in the ring, and whether it's bringing the Hurricane character to life in WCW or not, I think Helms would be that. They're three guys that you would probably look at building the division, the cruiserweight division around. Ray we know can go on to do other things down the track, and whether cruiserweight guys get built into the other parts of the roster, I mean that's all future booking as well. I think at the time, now I know in hindsight they never really made it in WWE, but at the time I think three guys had a lot of potential, could have possibly been used. The Natural Born Thrillers, Sean O'Haire, Chuck Palumbo, Mark Jindrak. I think those three guys at the time, they were viewed as having potential. Clearly WWE thought they did because they tried to use each of them several times. I think image and various factors played in there, but they'd be three guys that I'd be looking at keeping and seeing if you can do something with them because they're future. They're guys that you can maybe build into in the future. I always liked Lance Storm's character in WCW. I thought he was tremendous with what he brought when he came over from ECW. then a guy, an underneath guy. I mean, he'd only just really started in the company at the time, and I'll talk about him more later on. But you can't go past AJ Styles. You've got to look at ways to use him. You're going to build him through the ranks completely. I think his talent is going to allow you to get more out of it. You're going to see him as, well, we can do a few things with him as a cruiserweight. He only just joined the company and obviously was impressing, but when the company goes under, I think you're going to sign him and a couple of other underneath cruiserweight guys as, well, we've got to have our next generation of cruiserweights. But then we know what AJ becomes. I think he becomes a guy that you're going to get a lot more out of than you thought at the time. Right. But
AJ, I didn't mention. Yeah, let me just mention AJ for a minute, Dave, because that was a guy that I was not thinking of yet, because I know eventually we're going to get into like guys that are kind of floating around. I know AJ was kind of bouncing around in 2000. I know he was still kind of mostly in the indies, and he did have a cup of coffee on like Velocity.
He was primarily working in NWA Wildside, which by late 2000 was actually a development territory for WCW. They had a lot of their under contract guys down there. And AJ Styles was one of the guys that was put on a contract because of his work down there. And just at the very end, he came on. He had a few TV appearances. Even got as a tag. It was him and is it Air Paris, Air Stud, something, Air Raid or whatever they were. But they were that in that cruiser tag division. They were being brought in, but they got some TV time. The last couple of episodes right before the company shuts down, they're starting to get TV time, and then the company goes under. So there was something in them. They were looked at as potential future guys.
Yeah, I'm looking now, trying to see. Let's see. Air Raid. Yeah, it was him in Paris. Yep. Air Paris. That was his name, Air Paris. Yeah, was his name Air Paris? Yeah, it was. Frank Paris, yep, went by Airpiece 43. He's from Georgia too. They were Air Raid, and Zerr Styles and Air Raid. The team's gimmick saw both men dressed in G suits, with Air Raid also appearing on Thunder on the March 5th, 01 episode of Nitro. They were entered into a tournament for the newly created WCW Cruiserweight Tag Titles, but were eliminated in the first round by Elix Skipper and Kid Romeo. All right. So I would add AJ Styles to my list. I definitely would, because we do have to have like some we do need to have some tags, some tag teams. I like your Jindrak. I guess I was kind of blocked in my mind on the factions. What made me laugh was you had Jindrak and O'Hare and Palumbo, but everybody loved Mike Sanders. Now, there's only one I almost said Steve Gutenberg. There's only James Grunberg in the world, who's the biggest Mike Sanders fan on the planet. I've never had to hear myself say greatest Mike Sanders fan on the planet. But I think he was overrated, and once he got to TNA in 2002, we realized he was. But those other guys, those three guys, those big dudes, definitely would have been U.S. championship contenders, and I probably would have. I'll say this, Dave. I probably would have brought back the TV title. The TV title pretty much went under when they did that whole reboot thing in 2000. I would have brought back the TV title because I think that's a good little secondary belt. I like it. Would you have brought back the TV title?
Yeah, possibly. I think it depends on how things were going.
Sure.
I think I would have probably put a little more emphasis on the cruiserweight title and the division. I think had the potential to probably be where you could bring some stars through, and you're using the United States title. So the TV title could be a benefit, but you don't want to be oversaturated either. So I think that'd be something I would consider. I'm not sure.
Okay. I definitely would not do the cruiserweight tag titles. I think that's too much. I think that's overkill. One pair of tag team titles is enough. I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't think you need a second pair. Like I wouldn't even do a U.S. tag team title. I think that's probably because we don't have a roster that would be that big like a WWF where you would need a zillion guys and have to supplement them with all these belts.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious. So Jindrak, O'Hare, and Palumbo, those guys I would definitely push. I probably would have dumped Mike Sanders. I think he was overrated crap, but that's just my opinion. Guys like Hoovy, Ray, Psychosis. I would have definitely kept those guys around. I'm trying to think of what about? I got a guy because technically he debuted at WrestleMania 17, so he technically was not with the company when they went under, and that's Rhino.
Well,
I would have brought Rhino into WC. I would have brought him into when ECW went under. So by the time the reason I'm mentioning him, Dave, is because I feel like he would have probably done well in WCW and had been there already before we got to this point. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit, but
yeah. Well, I guess that brings us on to the next question, the next part, which is guys from outside WCW who because you can't rely on everyone that was there. We know that because there's a lot of guys that have a bit of a bad history. There are guys that I guess I've skipped one question. Guys that I wouldn't want to have. We mentioned a couple of guys we wouldn't want to have. You mentioned Buff. We mentioned probably Lex. I would probably also steer clear of bringing in Nash and Hall and Hogan. I think their time is done. The politics that they bring I wouldn't want anywhere near my company. And I'd probably be avoiding someone like Shane Douglas as well. I think, he's had his ECW career was great, but I just don't think his return to WCW, I don't think he's someone that I would want around. You hear a little bit about the way he was backstage, and his attitude to the business is probably not the best at that time. And you're wanting to have a bit of a mixture of. So I think we've sort of targeted. We've had some veteran guys. We've got some up and coming guys. I don't think Douglas fits the mold of. He's not someone that I would want to push moving forward. But I don't think he would want to be on the roster if he's going to be losing every other week and putting guys over all the time. So I think it would probably be a mutual decision. He'd probably be like, yeah, we're not looking at using you. Well, then I don't want to be here.
And, you know how he feels about Flair. So, and if we keep Flair in a prominent role, he ain't going to stick around. So, I'll tell you this. You know who I would keep on my booking committee? Now I'm not talking about, let's take a parking spot for a minute and go off the talent part. This guy I would want on my booking committee, and that's Dusty Rhodes.
Okay.
Gotta have the dream before WWF snatches him up. Even though we're 12 years before NXT, I would so keep Dusty on booking. Now I know.
On booking, but not in charge. On booking, but not in charge.
No. Just as a guy, just as a writer, you and I are in charge.
Yes.
Dream, you got to answer to us, baby.
That's right, baby.
I think we need Dusty because I think we need to keep the. Yeah, do we need some fresh, some fresh thinking? Yes, but do we need do we need somebody to kind of keep us stable? Yeah.
Look, I think tied in there, here's one that was on the roster at the time. I don't think he was being used properly at the time, but we certainly know he's a guy that can bring a lot to the table. And by 2001, certainly his experience and leadership is Dusty's boy Dustin. Dustin was was on roster, and we know that he's still going strong today in AEW, and there's a lot of good talk about the role he plays in the company there. I think there would be ways to use Dustin better than he ever was used in WCW on that last run, and he's still got a lot in the tank.
Definitely. Yes, I like Dustin there. Even if he transitions from possible talent to management to an agent, I would see that as well. How about? I would definitely not do a Tank Abbott. I think he was just that was
another one that's out the door. Yep, bye Tank.
Bye Tank. Sorry, Vince Russo's not here. We ain't bringing him in either, bro.
Yeah. Back to UFC.
Yeah, back to UFC.
Take Russo with you to UFC. That could be interesting.
Yeah. I can see that definitely. He would fit that role, but not on our payroll. What about? Let me take a look at. Say the last pay-per-view before those. What was that? Greed.
Yep.
That was Greed, right? It was the last pay-per-view.
Yep, Greed, March 18th.
Yep, March 18th, 2001. So you look, Shane Hell, let's see. So you got Jason Jet, Kwee-Wee. I would definitely keep Elix Skipper.
Mm-hmm.
Kid Romeo I was 50-50 on, but I liked Elix Skipper. I'd keep Kidman, keep Ray. Sean Stasiak? What about a guy like Bam Bam Bigelow?
I think he falls into what I was suggesting about Shane Douglas. He's a veteran talent, but if you're not looking at building around him, do you really want to be keeping him on the roster? And maybe, I think I'd be looking at he'd be probably more likely to give him a chance to go back to Japan and do stuff in Japan rather than have him putting guys over left and right on a roster moving forward.
Yeah, you're probably right. How about, I got a great guy. He's on one of these tag teams. How about Lance Storm?
Yeah, I said that before. I said that Lance, I always liked his character.
Yeah, I like Lance too. You did say Lance, my bad.
Here's two guys one guy I definitely would not have him. You might have a different opinion. I wouldn't want Conan. I was never a Conan fan. I don't think much of his in-ring talent. I never liked his character in WCW. I wouldn't want him anywhere near my company.
Yeah, you mentioned Mike Awesome. He's another one that's kind of an untrustworthy head case. I don't know if after what happened in 2000 with him and taking the ECW belt to W, I don't know if I want to deal with that kind of crap either. Ernest Miller, he'd be a pretty good manager. Could work too, but he's a pretty good manager. What about Rick Steiner? Think he was kind of over the hill. I have a feeling he'd be a lot like Scott. I think he'd be too much.
I think he's an interesting case. I think he already had moved into the role of being willing to put guys over. He could be useful to have on the roster as that veteran talent to put over some of the younger guys. But I think you're running the same thing with him and Scott. You step out of line, one bad move, and you're on your bike. You're out of here.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's I think there's a few guys there who'd be saying we wouldn't want around. Let's go back. Let's go where we were heading a moment ago. And
sure.
Outside the company, who are you wanting to bring in? You've already mentioned Rhino. Who's out there? And we're going. Obviously, we're targeting sort of that March, April. We're targeting this time period when ECW's just collapsed. There are a couple of WWE guys that have lost their spots. So I'm gonna put it like this: 2 or 3 guys who are maybe unemployed or recently, most likely not yet picked up, that you would want to bring in to work around, and maybe let's throw it out there. If the company is around and WCW is ongoing, there's going to be bidding wars for some WWE talent. One or two WWE guys that were on roster in 2001 that, might have been willing to jump ship. So obviously you're not going to get a Stone Cold and a Rock, but
no.
Guys that, so two or three guys that are out there that you definitely be wanting to bring in, and maybe one or two WWF guys you're hoping to poach.
Well, let's think of guys in like 99 or 2000 that probably would have been unhappy in 99 or 2000 and into 2001. Maybe a guy like Test.
Yeah.
Test might have been a guy that maybe thought greener pastures could have been in WCW.
Yeah.
Maybe. What about, say, the Dudley Boys had already left. I don't know about, obviously I don't know if they would have gone after the Hardys. I think the Hardys I think the WWF crowd liked the Hardys. I don't think they would have ever left there. Yeah. Who was unhappy or who was useless? And do you think a guy like a Raven? Oh, the Raven was already in WCW, and we know how that went. Yeah. How about a hard?
Two guys that I would look at maybe throwing money at. Not so much from they're unhappy, but two guys you might have been able to entice over might be Edge and Christian. I don't say that they would, because we know that the careers that they had,
right.
But sort of moving into 2001, they've done the tag team for a couple of years. They were probably not yet quite ready to be moved up by Vince, but they might have felt they were ready. And maybe if enough money was thrown at them and the right promises were made, you might have been able to entice an Edge or a Christian over to jump ship. Maybe. Like I said, these are guys, certainly guys I'd like to try and have a conversation with. Hey guys, come over. I think we can do something with you.
Yeah. That's in it. Yeah. The Edge of Christian thing's interesting. I'm surprised you brought them up, Dave, because I feel like Edge would be very loyal. Christian, I don't know, because Christian always, I think, got a feel from the company that he was never in Edge's level. I think they always wanted to. I think he always wanted to be a WWE guy, and I think they felt Edge was his own guy, and he was a future star. And Vince always kind of thought Christian was kind of like a secondary. Christian, I could easily see as somebody who could definitely thrive in a rejuvenated WCW.
Yeah,
maybe working with Jarrett and being like a cleaner, heel stable, So I like that idea. Looking at the rest of the problem at WWF in 01, Dave, is that everybody was happy.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I got one. Oh my God, I can't believe I do only in our heads. If we're establishing, I might be going off the path here a bit, Dave, and tell me if I am. Thinking about a women's division. I think you know where I might be going. You want to talk about somebody that needed a change of scenery in 2001? China.
Yeah.
China would have gone to a rejuvenated WCW in a heartbeat.
I think you're right. I think, and it doesn't need to be a women's division. She's proven she can go with the men. I think as a character and as a personality, she brings something to the mix that you would want to pick up. So I like that thought. Throw some money at her and see if she comes. I think I agree with you. There's a lot of guys that, 2001 WWE roster really is on the up. There's not a lot of guys that are probably on the downward spiral, but China is something I think who would benefit from a change of scenery. What about outside? I mean, my number one target would be Rob Van Dam.
Yeah, definitely. RVD. I would think perhaps maybe we start poking into Japan, because All Japan kind of hit the toilet, and New Japan was kind of in a transition stage. So maybe there's guys like a Hashimoto. Was he still alive in 01? I think so. Maybe a Muda. I know he's older, but he's a commodity in WCW at that time.
He's a commodity. I like the idea of Muda because he's a commodity that has the history in the company.
Correct.
He certainly by 2001, 2002 was becoming one of the top guys in Japan. So he's a guy you could bring over and use him correctly. You could really use him at the top of the card.
Yeah.
As a main event player. Here's one for you, not contracted to anyone at the time, but certainly recent enough in WWE that could make a name value. What about Ken Shamrock?
Well, Kenny kind of vanished, and we all know where Kenny would go in 2002. So I like I don't think you're too off with your thinking there, because we're thinking of guys that left in like 99 and 2000. I like that idea a lot, actually. I like Ken Shamrock. What about a guy, we're trying to think about guys that left in 99 and went to WCW and then maybe didn't go anywhere else. Trying to think of some other ECW guys. Interesting. What other guys in ECW that didn't go anywhere? I'm going to do this, Dave. I'm going to go to, let's see, Victory Road 2004. I'm looking at the first pay-per-view in TNA, because we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
There's guys like Monty Brown, guys like Petey Williams, some of these indie guys that were kind of floating around, and didn't have anywhere to go yet. Ron Killings. I like Ron Killings.
But he was still K-Quick in WWE in
I thought he left in 01. How long was he in 01? Because I'm watching one of my chrono watches. I'm in November of 01, and I thought he was gone by then. No?
Yeah, but he might have been gone by November, but I'm just popping back into, I was in historyofwwe.com, and in, around the time of WrestleMania, K-Quick wrestles the following night. He's on Jacked. He's getting victories on Jacked. He's wrestling on
on
Raw and SmackDown. So he's still with the company in April 2001.
Wow. That's crazy. I thought he was gone.
Actually, I'll tell you a WWE guy who I would throw some money at. And this is from a different perspective, but in 2001, if I'm rebuilding WCW and I'm rebuilding the cruiserweight division, I'd look at trying to bring in Taka Michinoku. They were done with him. Like the Kai and Tai were just jobber tag team by early 2001. he was looking to get out of there. I think if you brought him over, you could turn him into that showpiece of, one of those, a new player in the cruiserweight division in WCW. I think he'd have a field day working with some new talent.
I like that idea. I think we're definitely talking about, keeping the cruiserweight division strong. So I think Ataka would be that'd be a nice choice. I think a guy like a Great Sasuke, because he kind of vanished in '97. He was part of that kind of situation, and it didn't work out for him. How about some of these guys that were kind of in the indies that would end up in what would be TNA? Like, where were guys like Bobby Roode? Like, where were they in 2001?
They were still coming up. I think they were still cutting their teeth in the lower indie circuit. I know that Chris Harris and James Storm were on WCW developmental contracts when the company went under.
Right.
And they certainly had pretty good TNA careers.
They did. And I think they'd be a great tag team. I think they could be a team we would boost up, and they could be a new dominant babyface, I suppose, tag team that could end up turning heel throughout the next couple of years in WCW. I like that idea. I would definitely go for a Bobby Roode and a Petey Williams and some of those guys. Here's an interesting thinking, Dave, considering about poaching. Now, obviously, OVW was contracted to WWF. But if we had good enough scouting and we went down to Kentucky and we're looking at Brock Lesnar, we're looking at Shelton Benjamin and John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, and you think to yourself, wow, we can make these guys kind of cool, and they're making shit right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy. I'm thinking it's easy to think that, but I think WWE would have had probably something on their contracts. Guys like that wouldn't have been going anywhere. I think.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Would have been
too easy.
Yeah.
Too easy. Yeah. Good point.
Oh, well, we could go through lists of people for a long time, but
I know.
I think we've highlighted some guys that would be looking to bring in new talent to bring in. I think the big player I think we've both agreed on is RVD, and I liked your idea of bringing Muda back or one of the other top Japanese guys. I think there'd be some guys there. Look, before we move on to perhaps what some of the storylines or booking might look like, would you be bringing anyone in as a commentator? Would you be looking at bringing in Joey Styles, or would you want to just use the guys that they had?
Well, I definitely would have kept Tony Schiavone because Tony's fucking great. I would have I might have kept, depending on how many shows, I might have kept Scott Hudson because I like Scott. I would have definitely fired Mark Madden's useless ass because he sucked. Probably. What do you think about keeping Big Larry Legend? What do you think?
I always liked Larry as a commentator, but he'd been commentating since the Dangerous Alliance. So since 92, he'd pretty much been on commentary, and maybe again you're looking at. I think keeping one or two of the old guys on is a good thing. I think you would probably want to bring someone in, and I think if you were going to look at keeping a Hudson or a Schiavone, I think Larry would be probably one of the guys that you just go, look, we really appreciate it, but we need to put someone new in that spot.
Right. True. How about Taz?
Well, he was rock solid in WWE at this point, wasn't
he? Maybe that's a guy you poach as a commentator.
Maybe.
As we're thinking of poaching. I think a guy like JR's locked in. All right, how about this, Dave?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you know where I'm going.
I think I know where you might be going now.
Well, maybe a certain guy that walks around with a one-strapped, wrestling tights and a crown decides, fuck you, I'm not waiting until Survivor Series. Why not?
You know what? I think there'd be a very legitimate chance with what went down in February 2001 and how Lawler was feeling about it. And we know, sadly, in the end, it was the wrong choice for him. He initially chose one, but I know where he was coming from at the time. I could see him very quickly being picked up by WCW. I don't think they would. I think they would have thrown. Let's put it this way: if Scott, I'll ask you. Let me rephrase the question for you.
Mm-hmm.
We're in charge. You're in charge of personnel, and you find out that Jerry Lawler is no longer under contract with WWE. He's just left the company. Are you throwing money at him? Are you saying, "Tell me, write your own check"?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I agree.
I do. Yeah, I do. Definitely.
Yeah, I don't see why you do.
I don't see how you don't. We got it handed to us. I don't see how you don't. And you have Shivani, Jerry, and we'll have guys that Lawler could refer to in his, in his Memphis days. We could do some special shows at the Mid-South Coliseum. I think that's something to think about. Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a big thing. I would be throwing money at him. Just tell us what you want, Jerry. It's yours. We want you. Tell us what you want. And him and Tony, I think that they could make a good team. I think that would be interesting to hear them. You got the history. You've got almost the best of both worlds. It might rejuvenate Tony a little bit.
We would do our best to rejuvenate Tony, Dave.
Absolutely.
We would have to. Yep.
All right. Well, there you go. There's some of the key players. There's some of the pieces being put in place by this new booking team of Scott Criscuolo and David Hall. So what's it going to look like? How might some of this play out? So we're going to look at just a few different parts. Like I said, not month by month, but just sort of the scene and what it might look like. And so the best place to start is at the top. And I think I throw an idea. This is how I would look at doing it. And then I'd love to hear, Scott, whether you agree or whether you might go in a different direction. But this is what I would look at doing at the top of the card with WCW. I think there are two key players we're looking at here. One is Goldberg, one is Booker T. They're sort of the guys I'm wanting to build around. So I'm going to start with Booker T as world champion because I would have the belt on. I know Panama City, I know that was a WWE thing. We'd probably look at having something done similar before the transition of ownership. I would get that belt on Booker T as quickly as you can.
Yep.
Because as I said, I don't want the title on Scott Steiner.
No, absolutely not.
I would probably build, whether you do it at the first pay-per-view that we run as a company, or you've got him coming in as the new champion, that you're looking at Booker and Scott probably having that first, Booker taking the belt off Scott and having that sort of maybe a rematch there, just sort of that, establishing Booker as champ. And then from there, I'm probably going to have a few months where Booker he takes on the top. He beats a Jarrett. He beats, whether you maybe have DDP as a face, you can maybe turn him heel. He's a guy you could easily do heel.
Oh, yeah,
maybe you have a run where he beats a Lance Storm or a Sean O'Hare, someone who's up and coming and maybe earns a shot. But I'd have Booker T run through a few guys. He's going to win, defense after defense for a few months. So that's how I'm holding Booker on that side. On the other side of the picture, we bring back Goldberg. So the storyline that WCW had used was Scott Steiner had beaten Goldberg in a loser leaves town match. That was in February or March or whatever. So Goldberg's technically off the scene. I would bring him back in a big way. I'll probably even, you'd hype that he's coming back. I'd probably even have him spear the crap out of Scott Steiner in maybe in the rematch against Booker T. He spears Scott Steiner, and so Scott wants a match again, and he just absolutely pulverizes Steiner. And then you start doing the same thing with Goldberg. You get him going on. He goes on another streak. He's beating everyone that you put in front of him. It can be up and comers. It can be bringing someone in, whoever. Maybe you have him face Muda, the best from Japan, and do whatever.
Right.
And sort of around the middle of the year, I would start to have a change of attitude in Booker T. I think I'd have Booker T start to put out the whole, well, I'm the champ. I've been the champ for maybe the longest reigning. He might have held the belt for 6 months, but maybe he's the longest reigning WCW champ in years because the belt changed hands every other day. So it's
right.
You got to sort of play up the whole thing that he's beating everyone. So maybe the arrogance comes in, maybe a little similar to the sort of character you got with King Booker in WWF. Like not that you'd have him as the King Booker, but just that arrogance that I'm the greatest, I'm the best, and you could have him start to turn heel, and then he starts beating some of the faces. He's beating a Rey Mysterio and whoever else is DDP is a good guy. Whoever he beats a Sting, maybe there's your Halloween Havoc match. He beats Sting, so really putting over this thing, and I would be building to Booker T and Goldberg at Starrcade at the end of the year, with both guys coming in on these hot, unbeaten runs, and Booker T having transitioned to the heel, so that you've got a face Goldberg coming in against a heel Booker T. That's the direction I'd probably take the world title scene through the year. What are your thoughts on that, Scott? Would you look at doing things a bit differently? How would you view the world title picture?
I definitely got to keep Booker strong as a baby face, and I definitely like the eventually it starts to get to him, or he, shall we say, maybe gets some bad advice from a manager or something of that nature. I think maybe Jerry Lawler kind of gets in Booker's ear. He could be like manager / announcer. I definitely like one guy that I think definitely has earned the right to stay in the main event picture, even if he's maybe U.S. champion for a time, would be DDP. I agree with you on that. I like DDP at the top of the card. I would eventually try to create a faction with Booker T, build him up to be the biggest heel in wrestling, and try to lead to Booker T and Goldberg at Starrcade. I think Booker T needs to be built up. I mean, Goldberg needs to be built up at this point in 2001. If you're going to get back in the game and go up against the WWF, which is now the powerhouse that WCW was in, say, 96 or 97, I think Goldberg needs to be at the top again.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yes.
But for the most part, I like your thinking. I like the story you're telling.
I like your idea of maybe getting a faction going. I'm just thinking on the fly. What if this is where you could utilize a Ric Flair? Ric Flair could become that guy who's talking that, even when he's a good guy, he could be encouraging Booker T, you're great and I'm always here for you, and then slowly you see Booker start to turn, but Flair's there in his ear as well, and always encouraging his champ, to the point that maybe Flair becomes his manager, and Flair encourages him. Talks about how I had the Horseman, and the Horseman always there for me, and let's and so Flair handpicks a couple of guys to Booker is going to work with, but in reality they are, in the longer term, going to be the guys that are going to try and help keep the belt on him. So as he becomes a heel, you've got to use the heel antics. So I think that could be an interesting little story.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think Flair is a guy that you could really rely on, in any capacity. Like I said, he's got to get built up. He's a guy that you've got to that you kind of got to get his emotional stability back, meaning Flair, and his confidence back. I think this is a great opportunity to do that, to help build up these other, to build up a Booker and kind of put some guys together. Maybe let me tell you something. Flair's the kind of guy that you help build up a Jindrak, an O'Hare, a Palumbo. Yeah, definitely. You build those guys up and you make them studs and set them free.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But then again, you know me, Dave. I'm a junkie for factions. So I'm a mark for that stuff. So I got no problem with factions. No problems at all. But I like that idea. Yeah. So I definitely think that DDP, like having Booker at the front of this faction to go up against Goldberg and be like, listen, this is a new WCW Goldberg. Bischoff's not here to coddle you. All right. We are not here to make things easy for you. All right. We're not going to do like Eric Bischoff did and give you cupcake opponents like Kevin Nash. Start needling and be like, and then, just become you become that. Remember last year we were doing the whole Millionaires Club? Well, you're the millionaire now, Goldberg. And I, Ric Flair, have the new blood. But you spin it to where Goldberg's not any of these things, and Ric Flair is just trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
Yeah.
And you build all year to that point. Now, I would be careful about some other guys' heels. I think DDP is a great baby face.
Yeah. And maybe there's your turn. Maybe he's the guy you use to turn Booker T. Like DDP maybe earns a shot, and that's when Booker T goes full-fledged heel, is in a match against DDP.
Yeah, I would do that. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that Booker T starts helping boost these younger guys, the Jindraks, the O'Hares, and one of those guys becomes United States heavyweight champion. Perhaps you maybe make Jindrak U.S. champion. You keep that O'Hare Palumbo team going. They become, they're tag team champions. Yeah. They were tag team champions in 2001. And you you just start loading up this faction, and slowly but surely, a guy like an AJ Styles, Dave, you really get in there and start promoting him and start pushing him and get some of these baby faces. And by the time we get to Starrcade 2001, we've got a card loaded with established veterans in face and heel roles, and a bunch of guys that could take on the WWF in 2002.
Yeah.
2002 would be a very interesting year for WWF and WCW if they existed in our universe, because some guys that go in 2002 may not.
That's right.
I have a question, Dave.
Yep.
So let's be honest. In this alternate universe, although I think this question's coming up on our. Are we gotten there yet? Oh no, we're. Okay. To fill the TV. Oh, we did focus on this. Okay. Because I feel like now, if I'm jumping around, I apologize, but I have this in my head right now. I have this in my head right now. In our alternate universe, I still think Ring of Honor does start.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think obviously if WCW is still around, I don't think we ever get a TNA, because I think there's no need for it.
No, there's not. There's not. And the thing, it's very what I want to be careful here is it'd be very easy to just everything becomes what TNA becomes, and I wouldn't think. I think if you book WCW correctly, you wouldn't have that concern. I think, like you said, the right mix of up and comers with some of these veteran guys, I think would really help, perhaps re-energize some people in this company, and we'll see some good stuff happening.
Yeah. So that's I definitely think that's a case where we really start building guys and guys really start coming up, and I am optimistic that the company, we will be thriving with an amazing roster combination of youth and experience, because I think we would definitely be culling all of these guys like the AJ Styles and some of these, I think the Bobby Roodes and these guys. And I think that 2002 would be a very interesting situation, because here's my question. Steve Austin gets disgruntled with Vince McMahon in 2002, as you know. He bails. He was able to use Austin because his name was Steve Austin anyway. Does Stone Cold come back? Does he somehow be like, Vince, fuck you? And maybe he doesn't use the name Stone Cold, but all of a sudden on our Super Brawl, well, no, because he left in June? So maybe like Bash at the Beach 2002.
Wow.
Holy crap.
Very, very cool, especially because the people who his beef was with wouldn't be in the company. If Bischoff's not there, the Turner-ups aren't there. You're talking about a new management structure, and if he's hearing through guys like people who he had relationship with when he was in the company, a DDP, a Dustin Rhodes, guys that he trusts. Hey, it's different. It's different now. Again, I'd be throwing all the money in the world at him. If you're free and you want to work, we want you, and you turn up. This isn't going to be a build you up. It'll be you turn up, and it's going to be Goldberg Austin as soon as we can make it. That's what I'd be doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and that way, you can kind of filter Goldberg away from the world title to help build other guys, and I think it's very helpful to the youth to kind of be able to give the young guys a chance to shine with some championships, and then Goldberg and Austin could possibly be a build to, say Starrcade 02.
Yeah.
But we're going kind of crazy now, but we're looking too far ahead. But if you build to Booker and Goldberg at Starrcade 01 with the talent we have, and have Booker T meander around through 2001 as world champion, leading to a Booker Goldberg Starrcade 01 WCW title match, I think we could make some serious money. And I think if we really push the Jindraks, the O'Hares, the Palombos, and keep Rey Mysterio, see, that's a big one, Dave, because I think we in WCW could be honored to be the one to make Rey Mysterio a world champion before WWF. And then we wouldn't need Eddie Guerrero dying to do that.
That's right. And I think that's where the benefit. One thing I was going to talk about, and I may as well talk about now. I think this is where the benefit of utilizing the cruiserweight division a bit better can pay dividends, because I think the cruiserweight division, they've got those fast-paced matches, but you have the potential to make stars out of it. And I think you start when you rebuild this company, you use guys like Billy Kidman and Ray as they've been the cornerstone of the division. Maybe you have Ray as your champion as quick as you can, but the premise being, he's going to move out of there. He's going to become too big or too important for the cruiserweights, and you're able to move him into the US title scene, the world title picture, like you just said, whether it's a couple of years for the world, but you can certainly get him up into the secondary title quite quickly in 2001. He could be a guy feuding with one-on-one with a Mark Jindrak, help lead him through some matches. And maybe he doesn't win the title, but he can certainly make him look good and help bring the perception that Jindrak is a player. You can rely on him to do that. And at the same time, you'd be working with guys like Lance Storm as well and other guys on the roster in that upper mid card. I think you're really going to get some good matches. And then you're able to, you've got new guys coming through. And this is where I think you get your AJ Styles benefit, where I think it becomes something unexpected. You probably have guys like an AJ Styles. Another guy, and that just reminds me, another guy I would bring in to the company in 01 to work in the cruiserweight division initially would be Christopher Daniels.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And so you start, and where I'll bring that in is you start to bring new blood into the cruiser division. So your AJ Styles and your Christopher Daniels and your Shane Helms, where they're your next generation cruiserweight guys, and you start building around them. And, so guys like Hoovy and all that, you don't need them so much anymore because you've got a new cruiserweight scene. This is where I was saying you could bring Tarker in and Tarker and AJ and Christopher Daniels and Helms. They could be dominating that cruiserweight division for 6 months, back and forth, different matches with each other. But I think that as that's happening, I could see someone like AJ just getting so over with the fans, like Ray, that you've got to start. He becomes too big for the cruiser division, and you start moving him up. You start moving him up into the US title picture, or maybe like you said earlier, maybe this is where you have a TV title for a guy like that to start that climb. Mm-hmm. Building to somewhere down the line where maybe AJ's, he's maybe battling for the TV title at unexpectedly at Starrcade, because his rise in TNA was very quick. He went from a nobody, in the X division, he was world champion within 6 months. His climb in TNA when it really launched in 0203 was very fast. And I think it's because of what he could do in the ring. And I think, I'm not looking to start him as a player, but I think what he brings to the ring, you'd be very quickly moving him out of the cruiserweights and into a different picture.
Yeah, definitely. And then as time progresses, as those guys promote themselves to the next level, you start bringing in more cruisers and you start bringing in younger guys. And maybe eventually, Dave, if you move ahead a couple of years, a guy like a Jeff Hardy, who does eventually go to TNA in 2004, instead comes to WCW when, the Hardy Boys team kind of fizzles out. And next thing you know, Jeff Hardy not only can help the cruiserweight division, but you put him on a collision course towards becoming a main eventer and a world champion.
Yeah.
I think in our alternate universe, we what we need to do is think about the fact that the kinds of guys that would eventually get to the top of the cards in like TNA would do the same thing in WCW because, we're pretty smart, except we're not going to have, a lot of trash, and we'll never bring Vince Russo in. So,
and I think, Bret Hart, if you've read Bret Hart's book, he talks about a conversation he had with Pedro Morales when Bret was still coming up the ranks in WWE. And he said, Pedro told him, in the end, talent will always come through. And I think that's the thing. These guys, like I said, we have the benefit of hindsight. We can look back and see these are guys that no matter where they've gone, they ended up becoming a player. And I think if they're on your roster in WCW, they are going to end up coming through and becoming a player. It's just how you use them determines whether or not you are going to make money off it or whether you're going to be like, TNA never really made money. They've been a big player, but they've never been, and that's why guys end up going to WWE. They make their name, but they go elsewhere. But if you get the right booking and the right push behind them, this
Mhm.
WCW being rebuilt, you could make household names of some of these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because eventually, we're going to have to kind of move, obviously, natural progression. You're moving up these cruiserweight guys if they really get over, and we have no glass ceiling. We're looking to make money. We're looking to advance our product. So a guy like a AJ Styles, I think, obviously would eventually be brought to the, to the main event and into the world championship picture.
Oh
As we
yeah,
bring up fresh cruiserweight guys like like a Petey Williams and a Chris Sabin when we move ahead in history. So I love that idea. I think the cruiserweight division needs to stay. I think it would be a great gem for us. We treat it. It's the one thing Bischoff did right during his stretch in terms of booking Nitro from top to bottom is firing up those shows with a killer cruiser match. We would do the same thing. Make that cruiserweight title. The key thing for us, Dave, is make that cruiserweight title just as important as the WCW title.
Oh yeah, you can, and you could if you build the division right. Let me bring it to our modern day real world. We are now living in a world where, I mean, I'm sure you've seen, listeners have seen, Ric Flair was tossing out his complaints about the fact that Charlotte and Rhea Ripley didn't main event night one. The women's championship match didn't main event. Now I think that the Usos and Owens and Sammy was the right main event. I'm not going to in any way deny that. But we are in a world now where the women's division has been built in a way where it is acceptable to have a women's match as your main event. I think the WCW, if you build and work the division correctly, you could have that cruiserweight title seen almost on par, not quite, but almost on par with your men's world champion, because it's the different division, the weight class.
Right.
You build it right. I think you could have that, and maybe one day you have someone who holds both belts at the same time. Maybe that's the destiny of AJ Styles. Maybe he becomes the first, or Rey Mysterio becomes the first man to hold both belts at the same time. As part of your push for, maybe it would be Ray that you would push up first, but maybe he holds the cruiserweight title at the same time as he wins the world championship, and really put into that similar stratosphere.
Could you imagine we do the build and we move to, say, Starrcade 02 and it's AJ and Ray for the WCW title?
Oh, what a match that would be.
Yeah, absolutely.
In their, I mean, Ray in his peak. I mean, his peak. I mean, I know I say his peak. I mean, he had a lot of peaks, but certainly 2002, 2003 Ray, he really was putting it all together in ring, not just quick flips and flying around, but the whole match was sensational. And AJ coming into his own. I mean, they would tear the house down.
You could you could do that merge of the titles, or at least, title versus title. I don't think you would have to do a heel. I think you could do like a Hogan Warrior kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
I could never see Ray as a bad guy anyway. And then, utilizing the television titles and utilizing the U.S. titles and bringing up these guys like that. And then eventually guys like a Jindrak they could easily, the best thing about having guys like Ray and AJ Styles, smaller statured guys at the main event level, is all these other guys could be heels, all these big muscular Jindraks and O'Hares and Palombos, and they could be like, you little midgets don't belong here kind of thing. And that's a good kind of, if we continue really growing this heel faction with Booker, because I think Booker would be at the top of the card for a while, you could really progress a storyline like that could count on many levels, handle the main event level of the world title, into the U.S. title, into the TV title. You have some good tags. I think we definitely need to enhance our women's division. Again, I know we talked about China. Yes, China could actually win the U.S. title. But, we talk about maybe Sable decides to come, even though at that point I think she would eventually go to the WWF in 2003, although maybe she doesn't. Who knows? But you start cherry picking all these women these women's wrestlers in the indies in the early 2000s, like the Gail Kims and the
I know Mickey James, Alexis Louise. She was bouncing around the indie circuit for years before she got picked up by WWE, and I think if you're looking at building a real division, you want to try and pick up someone like her. There's a lot of the women ended up in the WWE. I mean, they all end up there in the end, but there were a lot of women who were bouncing the indie circuit at that, like you said, your Gail Kims and your Alexis Louise that you could pick up before they hit WWE.
Right.
And if you're building your division right, and you're building it very much like the Women's Revolution concept, where we're going to give them credibility and let them go, and you bring back a Medusa. There's China, and you bring back Medusa, who has that history in the company and has a history as a solid in-ring worker. You bring back someone like her and let someone like Medusa and China become your foundations of the women's division, but you are looking at an in-ring product that is comparable with the men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because 2001, don't forget, China was gone, and they really, during that, well, there would be an invasion storyline, so I don't know what what WWF would be doing in 2001 since there wouldn't be an invasion. Would they advance Trish Stratus by that point and Lita, and they would have the market cornered. But there again, you bring in Medusa, and China could be part. You can make her a babyface, or you can make her part of this Booker T Flair stable, and make her the big tough bitch as she's trying to and these other, and make her the dominant one in the women's division while building others into the women's division. I think I don't know why that intrigues me just as much as anything else we've talked about tonight, Dave. Is China has that opening. Maybe she, her life doesn't spiral downward, and she's in a stable promotion and in a stable work environment. You'd like to think that things would have been different, but I think she would be great to build a women's division. And again, you're going through the indies, or we find like the Francines, although she wasn't really a wrestler, and some of the women in WWE that didn't stick around. I think it's a huge advancement to get women's wrestlers in the indies and bouncing around, and I think we could really establish that, and just like the cruiserweight title, make it just as important, to the point where maybe when we get to a point in the WWF where there's just too many women on the roster, or Vince stops taking the women's division seriously, they got somewhere to go. Yeah.
So it's I think it's good. So let me ask you, before we look at wrapping up in a moment, let me ask you, there's two guys that really we talked about being key players. We haven't touched base on either of them in all these conversations through our main event and our secondary scene and our cruiserweights and all that. King and RVD. How would you use them? What would you do with them you've brought RVD in? Does he come in as a heel? Do we have the same problem that WWE had? Do we bring him in as a heel and the crowd get behind him? Do we bring him in as a baby face? How would you use RVD, and then how would you use Sting?
RVD, I think I would immediately just have as a baby face. I mean, I don't see how. I wouldn't try to do something dumb for the sake of getting the crowd to turn to him. I think that's too easy. I would immediately make him a babyface, and then kind of go from there. And would he be? I think he'd be a great TV champion, and work him up. Build him. We got so many good guys in this promotion that we're going to be building up young guys, the AJs and the Rays and the Jindraks and all these mid-card guys that we'd eventually see built up. I don't want to bring in RVD and immediately make him world champion just because we loved him in ECW. I think that's a guy that I would like to see start off kind of in the middle, build his way up. I wouldn't make him the cruiserweight champion. I think he's a bit beyond that. But I would definitely make him like a TV champion into a U.S. champion and eventually work him into the main event mix.
Maybe he's a guy, like we were talking before about our Jindraks, our Hairs and our Palombos, this faction that we're building with Booker T. Maybe those second tier guys, maybe while Booker's dealing with Goldberg and Sting, maybe those next guys are dealing with RVD and are cheating left and right to prevent RVD from winning the title. So maybe he's in that scene but just can't quite grab the title because this faction is just keeps costing him at every turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
with maybe the build to Starrcade, maybe RVD gets his moment at Starrcade as well.
Sure, you got it. I think that the one thing about that first Starrcade we do, Dave, in 2001 is really reestablishing ourselves as a dominant force and realizing, hey, we got a roster of people that everybody loves, and we're going to give you the guys you loved that WWE would have probably misused. And Sting. That's a hard one, believe it or not. We want him as the face of the company. Does he become a guy like a Taker who handles, kind of the unusual guys, or handles the, we put him in really big, crazy spots against some of these up-and-comers. Maybe he wrestles when Booker loses the title and he's out of the main event picture. Maybe a Booker-Sting feud, a Booker-Sting feud that maybe Sting gets put over, maybe he doesn't. That could be something established. You don't want to turn Sting into a job guy, but I would definitely. No, go ahead.
I was going to say that's where you get the benefit of someone like a Jarrett, because Jarrett could be someone that Sting deals with. Jarrett can his whole I'm the man. Who is he? Was the chosen one. Right. I'm the chosen one, and sort of play that chosen one concept. And Sting's like, well, no, I'm the man. Using him as that almost using him as that attraction. He doesn't need to be on every single event, but you could use him as that name attraction. I would love to see him rekindle this feud with Muta.
So
on a big stage.
Yeah, so would I.
I think that would be a way to use him too.
Yep. Maybe he gets his win back, because I felt like Muta always got the upper hand in 1989. So maybe he gets.
I know they tried. I mean, this is the thing. They actually tried to do something with them. The whole Vampiro Sting. Muta came in as part of that angle, but it was at a time when no one was watching and no one cared, and they never really did it correct. But if you bring Muta in as this Japanese legend, the best Japanese wrestler in the world is coming back to claim the crown here in WCW, and then there's Sting, the man who he's been dealing with Sting all his life. Sting can even do it. I've been dealing with you since this company started. What are you ever going to leave me alone?
Right.
And build up to some sort of mega. I mean, you got to remember, WCW had Hell in a Cell before WWE did, because that was what the Thunderdome cage was. It was basically a Hell in the Cell, build up to a big gimmick between the two.
Yeah, and we would have done a better job of booking it. We're not idiots. But yeah, I think that's what it is. I think Sting, and then you eventually, you work Sting around the title picture and such. What I would do now, I wouldn't do it. Obviously, I wouldn't do the same months as WWE, but I would definitely emphasize, Dave, the World War III pay-per-view concept, because you have to, because that's just like the Royal Rumble. That's what you use to put over fresh talent and get to the next level. So I would definitely do World War III, not necessarily in December, in November, because I think that it's too tight. I would do World War III, like, say, in September.
Before Halloween Havoc.
Yeah. And move Fall Brawl maybe to, or put the World War III match, maybe not do a World War III pay-per-view, but change World War III to another match. Put it on the Fall Brawl. I know Fall Brawl is the War Games. We can move that. We could treat War Games, Dave, like Hell in a Cell and move it around to
absolutely
to
whenever it's needed,
to soothe our fancy. Whatever.
Our Booker T faction, following on from Starrcade early 2002, you're going to want this faction that Booker T's put together. They're going to want a War Games match at some point.
Yep. And then you put together a team of amazing, and that's where a guy like an AJ Styles or a guy like an RVD you put over, because he could do crazy crap in the ring and that kind of thing. But I would definitely do the World War III concept as a match and do it at some point, either in August at Road Wild or maybe in September at Fall Brawl, and lead to a title match at Starrcade. I would definitely do that. I think that's easy to book, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'll tell you what, Scott. I'm excited. I'm excited.
I am too. Why did we have
why were we not in charge back then? Why couldn't they put us in charge back then? I think what we've just thrown around, and like I said, we just thrown around ideas. I think we've put together something here. My last question for this episode was really, could this have worked? Could the company have been saved? And what we've talked about today, I think there was potential to save the company, because I believe the demise of the company, part of it was the booking, booking issues they had with Russo and Bischoff at the end there. But I believe a lot of it had to do with the fact that the same people were on top for so long, the Hogans, the Nash, that whole brigade, you just had this main event picture that couldn't seem to be broken. And then when they tried to break it, they didn't book it correctly. And the young guys you weren't making stars by using the old players to make them. And I think what we've talked about today allows some veterans to be used well. It allows some young guys to be built up. And when you use your veterans to build your young guys, you're building a product that people are probably going to want to see.
Yep.
And that's what I think. I think what we've talked about today, I think we've shown that this company could have been rebuilt and could have been, it might maybe not necessarily to the level it was at its peak in 96, 97 at the peak of the NWO, but I think built up enough that they would have been still been a player in the business.
I think we definitely would have. I think eventually when we got some cachet, Dave, at Starrcade, maybe we at some point make doing what WWE does and maybe start getting some shows in big venues. Now the problem, unfortunately, with Starrcade being in December is, if you're going to do outdoor venues, they've got to be in the South or indoors. Perhaps we move Starrcade back to November. Maybe that's our one little bow shot at WWE as we do Starrcade the same month as Survivor Series, and then maybe work another big show at another venue. Maybe we do Bash at the Beach or Great American Bash in July in a big venue in the summer, big football venue.
And I think the other thing you would look at doing, as I said, in 2000 they toured Australia, and tickets sold in no time. I think the international touring could become a big key, but using it correctly, like building shows out of it, coming to an Australia, going to a Canada, doing a trip to the UK, and making those shows meaningful, not just. I mean, when WWE comes to Australia, until they did Super Showdown, a few years ago. It was just a house show, and nothing happened of any consequence. You go on these tours international, you make the shows important.
Yep. Yep. And I would also get rid of Road Wild. I think that's a stupid concept. We're not here for charity. There will be no free pay-per-views handed out to bikers. No. We are going to rebrand. I would probably, Dave, maybe to counter SummerSlam, although not do it the same weekend, obviously.
Yeah.
But I would probably make the Great American Bash our big August show. I would make the Great American Bash our big August show, and have it outdoors.
Yeah.
And make it a big venue. And then we do Starrcade in November at another big venue. I think that'd be something different. But anyway, that's something we'd have to think. But I love your concept of going international. Going into the UK, going to Australia, Canada, Mexico, some of the Germany, like some of these other countries.
Big show in Japan.
Oh yeah, I would definitely.
One
of the first things I would do, Dave, after you and I take over and call the shots, is the first thing I would do is call New Japan, and immediately make put up some sort of a deal. And work out an arrangement with New Japan, and maybe Muda could be our representative, and because All Japan was pretty much dead by 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
So I think we do that, and we continue to cultivate, because Vince isn't; he could care less. And instead of us just bringing in a bunch of humps, we bring in the best, Chono and Hashimoto. And, the guys that slowly grow in the 2000s, like Tanahashi and some of the younger. So,
but the difference is use them correctly. Make them meaningful, not what happened in, 93, 94, 96, where Japanese guys turn up in WCW and they're just jobbers. There's no name meaning. You want to make them meaningful.
Right, exactly. You don't just do it as a cheap throwaway novelty. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I am excited. Let's start it.
Absolutely.
That'd be a fun role-playing podcast if we were WCW. I think that'd be pretty great. Every month we book shows. I think it'd be pretty great. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this. I mean, it was a big labor of love, and we hope we didn't totally confuse you. But listen to the show and think about it. Think about, how in your opinion, in your mind as a wrestling fan, do you think WCW would have survived past March of 2001 with a different kind of promoter and a different way of thinking? I don't know. I'd be excited about something like that. That's just my opinion. But so thank you for joining us, Dave. You're the best, like always. Where can everyone find you?
Lurking around, guys. You can hit me up on Facebook. You'll often find me on the Place to Be pages. You can also hear me over on the North South Connection Network. You can catch me on Chronoso Monthly. So I encourage you to listen to that and listen to all the other great shows on the PTB network and the Quad of Pods. There's a lot of great stuff out there. But send me a message. You can send me a private message through Facebook. I'd love to hear from you and touch base, and love to hear your ideas.
Absolutely. Give us your thoughts on what you would do for a WCW reboot, I guess you could say, in 2001. Again, you can follow me on Twitter at Scott C. Podfather. You can follow me follow the brand on Twitter at PTBN Wrestling. We do the daily wrestling time travel where we tell you what was going on this date in wrestling history in terms of big shows. We have a great week. Obviously, you're listening to this awesome show. We'll have new episodes of Highway to the Impact Zone this week. New episode of the Place to Be podcast will be coming up this Monday. New episode of the NWA Saturday Special with myself and the Doctor. A lot of fun. So always join us here, PTB The PTBN Wrestling Network. It's the OG. It's your feed. Have a great rest of April. We'll be back 1 month from today, the third Wednesday of May, and we'll book ECW. No. We don't have enough money. That'd be easier because it probably costs less money. But anyway, we'll come up with a great topic for May and have a lot of fun like we always do. So for Dave Hall, I am Scott Criscuolo. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Looking Glass.